In the heart of Lagos, where the sun beats down mercilessly on cracked concrete and hope lives in the shadows of towering buildings, there lived a woman named Adunni. Her story is one that will make you question everything you think you know about giving, about sacrifice, about the mysterious ways the universe rewards those who serve with pure hearts. Adunni was not wealthy. Far from it. She lived in a small room behind a mechanic shop where the smell of engine oil mixed with the aroma of her simple meals. Every morning, she would wake before dawn, her calloused hands already reaching for the worn wooden spoon that had been her grandmother's. Her grandmother, who had whispered ancient secrets into her ear as a child. Secrets about the old ways. About spirits that walk among us, watching, waiting, testing the hearts of mortals. But Adunni had forgotten those whispers. Or so she thought. Each day, she would prepare just enough food for herself. Rice and beans, maybe some plantain if she'd been lucky with her small trading business. She sold phone cards and airtime from a tiny table at the bus stop. The coins she collected barely covered her rent and food. But something inside her, something she couldn't quite name, always made her cook extra. Just a little more. One morning, as she stirred her pot of jollof rice, she heard it. The crying. Soft at first, like a kitten mewing in the distance. But as she stepped outside her door, the sound grew clearer. A child. Hungry. Desperate. She found him sitting by the gutter, no more than 7 years old, his clothes torn and dirty, his eyes hollow with the kind of hunger that eats at your soul. Without thinking, without calculating what it would cost her, Adunni went back inside. She returned with a bowl. Steam rising from the rice like prayers ascending to heaven. The boy's eyes widened as if he was seeing a miracle. And maybe, just maybe, he ate with the urgency of someone who hadn't tasted food in days. Each grain of rice disappeared like precious jewels. When he finished, he looked up at her with tears streaming down his cheeks. He didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. His eyes said everything. The next day, there were 2 children. The day after that, 4. Word spreads fast on the street. Kindness has its own language, its own network, its own unstoppable momentum. Within a week, Adunni found herself cooking for a dozen hungry souls every single day. Her savings dwindled. Her own meals became smaller. She began to lose weight, her cheeks growing hollow, her clothes hanging loose on her shrinking frame. But she couldn't stop. Something deep inside her, something that felt ancient and powerful, wouldn't let her turn away from those hungry eyes. Her neighbors began to whisper. "That woman has lost her mind," they said. "She's feeding half the street while she starves herself. What kind of foolishness is this?" But Adunni didn't listen. She had learned to tune out the voices of doubt, the practical concerns, the logic that said she should take care of herself first. Because late at night, when the city grew quiet and the hungry children had gone to find places to sleep, she would hear something else. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps circling her small room. And sometimes she could swear she heard her grandmother's voice again, whispering, reminding her of the old stories. Stories about spirits who test human hearts. About blessings that come disguised as burdens. About the ancient law that says the universe always pays back what is given freely. 3 months passed. Adunni's body grew weaker, but her resolve grew stronger. She had learned to make a little rice feed many. Had discovered that love, when mixed with food, somehow makes it stretch further than logic would allow. The children began to bring others. Not just hungry children now, but elderly people with nowhere to go. Sick mothers carrying babies who cried from empty bellies. Men who had lost their jobs and their pride but not their need to eat. Her small courtyard became a sanctuary. A place where dignity was served alongside every meal. Where hope was ladled out with every spoonful. But the whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. More insistent. More cruel. "She's attracting all the beggars," they complained. "Property values will drop. Someone needs to stop this madness." One evening, as Adunni served the last bowl of the day, exhaustion weighing on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, a woman approached. She was different from the usual visitors. Well-dressed but not flashy. Elegant but not proud. Her eyes held a depth that seemed to see straight through to Adunni's soul. "I've been watching you," the woman said, her voice carrying an accent Adunni couldn't quite place. Something from the old country. Something that made her grandmother's whispers stir in her memory. "Every day, I see you give away what you cannot afford to give." Adunni nodded, too, tired to be embarrassed by her obvious poverty. "Tell me, child," the woman continued, "what do you hope to gain from all this?" The question hung in the air between them. Around them, the satisfied murmurs of full bellies created a gentle symphony. Children playing, adults talking quietly among themselves. The sound of community, of belonging, of home. "I don't know," Adunni answered honestly. I can't stop. Something inside me won't let me stop." The woman smiled then, and for just a moment, Adunni could have sworn she saw something impossible in her eyes. A flash of golden light. Ancient, powerful, divine. "Tomorrow," the woman said, pressing something into Adunni's palm. "Tomorrow, you will understand." Before Adunni could respond, before she could even look at what had been placed in her hand, the woman melted back into the evening crowd. Gone as mysteriously as she had appeared. That night, Adunni lay on her thin mattress, her stomach gnawing with familiar hunger. In her palm, she still held the object the woman had given her. She hadn't looked at it yet. Something told her to wait, to let morning come first. But sleep wouldn't come. The footsteps were back, circling her room. And now they were accompanied by voices. Not just her grandmother's voice anymore. Multiple voices, speaking in languages she didn't recognize but somehow understood. They spoke of tests, of rewards, of the ancient contract between heaven and earth that binds the generous to their destiny. As the first light of dawn crept through her small window, Adunni finally opened her palm. Inside was a small, carved piece of wood, unremarkable at first glance. But as the morning light touched it, she saw the intricate patterns, symbols that looked familiar, symbols she had seen before in her grandmother's house, carved into the doorframe, symbols of protection, of blessing, of... A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. But this wasn't the usual soft tapping of hungry children. This was urgent, insistent, almost excited. As she opened the door, she was greeted not by the usual crowd of hungry faces, but by something that would change everything. Standing before her was a group of people she had never seen before. Men and women in fine clothes. But their eyes held the same desperate hunger she had seen in so many others. Not hunger for food, something deeper, something that food alone could never satisfy. And at the front of the group stood a man whose face made her heart skip. He was staring at her with an expression of wonder, of disbelief, of recognition. "Are you the woman?" he asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "Who has been feeding the street?" Adunni nodded, suddenly aware of how she must look. Thin, tired, wearing yesterday's clothes. "I am Emeka Okonkwo," the man continued. The name hit her like lightning. Emeka Okonkwo, the billionaire businessman whose face was on billboards across the city, whose story of rising from poverty to unimaginable wealth was legend. "And I have been searching for you for 3 months." The wooden carving in her palm began to grow warm, almost alive. "You see," Emeka continued, tears now flowing freely down his cheeks, 25 years ago, I was one of those hungry children. The world seemed to stop spinning. A woman fed me when no one else would. A woman who shared her last grain of rice with a street boy who had nothing. She saved my life." Adunni's hands began to tremble. But before I could thank her properly, before I could repay her kindness, she disappeared. I've spent years searching. Years trying to find the angel who taught me that love still existed in this world. He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving her face. I never found her, but I found something else. I found that she had passed something down. A legacy. A spirit of giving that flows like water from one generation to the next. The wooden carving was now pulsing with warmth. And suddenly Adunni understood. Her grandmother's whispers became clear. The footsteps in the night. The mysterious woman who had appeared and disappeared. All of it part of something larger. Something ancient. Something that was about to reveal its true power. "Your grandmother," Emeka whispered, "saved my life. And now, I want to help you save many more." But what he said next would shatter everything Adunni thought she knew about her simple act of feeding the hungry. About the forces that had been watching her. About what was really at stake. And why her small room behind the mechanic's shop was about to become the center of something that would change not just her life, but the lives of thousands. The carved wood in her palm suddenly blazed with golden light, visible now to everyone standing there. And in that light, shapes began to form. Faces, voices, ancestors calling from beyond the veil. What they were about to tell her would explain everything, but it would also reveal a responsibility so vast, so Overwhelming, that Adunni would have to choose between the simple life she had known and a destiny that would test her in ways she could never imagine. The street children gathered closer, sensing something momentous was about to unfold. The wealthy strangers held their breath, and somewhere in the distance, drums began to beat. Ancient drums, calling, summoning. The golden light from the carved would cast dancing shadows across the faces of everyone gathered in Adunni's small courtyard. The drums grew louder, closer, as if the very earth beneath their feet was awakening to something that had been sleeping for decades. Emeka Okonkwo stepped forward, his expensive shoes crunching on the gravel, but his eyes never leaving the blazing talisman in Adunni's trembling hands. "Do you remember," he whispered, "the stories your grandmother used to tell?" Adunni's breath caught in her throat. How could he possibly know about her grandmother's stories? "She told you about the covenant of the empty bowl, didn't she?" The words hit her like thunder. Suddenly, she was 7 years old again, sitting cross-legged on a woven mat while her grandmother's weathered hands gestured in the firelight. When someone gives their last morsel to feed another, her grandmother's voice echoed across time. The ancestors take notice. They mark that soul. They bind it to an ancient promise. Adunni's knees nearly buckled. The carved wood was now so hot it almost burned, but she couldn't let go. It seemed fused to her palm. Part of her now. "Your grandmother," Emeka continued, his voice thick with emotion, "didn't just feed me that day 25 years ago. She awakened something." Around them, the street children who had been playing moments before now stood perfectly still, their eyes wide, watching, as if they too could sense the invisible currents of power flowing through the air. The wealthy strangers behind Emeka began to murmur among themselves, but their whispers carried an odd reverence, a recognition of something sacred unfolding. "She told me something before she disappeared," Emeka said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "Something I didn't understand at the time." He pulled out a piece of paper, yellowed with age, folded carefully like a treasure. She said, "The blood of giving flows like a river through generations. When you find wealth, remember to look for the next keeper of the bowl." Adunni's heart hammered against her ribs. She said I would know them by 3 signs. Emeka unfolded the paper with reverent care. First, they would feed the hungry even when they themselves had nothing left. The crowd of children around them nodded unconsciously. They had witnessed this truth every single day. Second, they would carry the mark of the ancestors. He gestured toward the blazing carving in her hand. And third, his voice dropped to barely above a whisper, they would be visited by the spirits of the generous dead. The footsteps, the voices in the night, her grandmother's whispers, all of it suddenly made perfect, terrifying sense. One of the street children, a girl no more than 10 with bright, knowing eyes, stepped forward. "Mama Adunni," she said in a voice far older than her years, "we always knew you were special. Sometimes when you cook, we see them standing behind you. Old women in white cloth. They smile when you stir the pot." Adunni felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The other children began to nod, their faces serious now, touched by the gravity of revelation. "They whisper things to you while you cook," another child added. "That's why your small rice feeds so many. That's why we never leave hungry, even when the pot looks empty." Emeka's eyes filled with tears again. "Do you understand what this means?" he asked Adunni. But before she could answer, the mysterious woman from the night before materialized from the crowd, as if she had been there all along, waiting for this moment. Her elegant bearing now revealed something else, something ancient, something not entirely of this world. "She understands more than she realizes," the woman said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries. "The question is whether she's ready to accept what comes next." The drums stopped. The sudden silence was deafening. Every person in the courtyard held their breath. Even the city itself seemed to pause, as if Lagos was listening to what would unfold next. "Adunni, daughter of Folake, granddaughter of Ialoja," the woman spoke, using names that Adunni had almost forgotten. Her grandmother's praised names, her mother's hidden history. "You have fulfilled the first requirement of the covenant. You have fed the hungry with a pure heart. You have given when you had nothing to give. You have proven that the spirit of generosity lives on in your bloodline." The carved wood in Adunni's hand pulsed brighter, and suddenly she could see them. The women in white cloth the children had spoken of, standing behind her, beside her, all around her, generations of women who had carried the same burden, the same blessing. Her grandmother stood closest, her face radiant with pride. Now, the mysterious woman continued, you must choose. The ancestors offer you a gift beyond imagination. Wealth beyond counting. Resources to feed not just this street, but thousands of streets. To build schools, hospitals, homes for those who have none. Emeka stepped forward again. The foundation I've built, he said, has been waiting for its true leader. Waiting for someone who understands that wealth is not owned, but held in trust. Someone who knows that abundance flows through open hands, not closed fists. He gestured to the group of well-dressed people behind him. These are not just business associates, he explained. They are the descendants of others your grandmother fed. Others your great-grandmother helped. Others your bloodline has touched across the decades. One by one, the strangers stepped forward. A woman in a crisp business suit. My father was dying of hunger in 1987, she said simply. An old woman gave him her last cup of gari. He never forgot. Neither did I. A man with silver hair and kind eyes. My mother was a struggling widow in 1993. Someone shared their soup with her children. That kindness saved our family. Made everything that came after possible. Another woman younger, with the bearing of someone used to boardrooms and power. My brother was a street boy 10 years ago. A woman fed him every day until he was strong enough to go to school. He's a doctor now. Story after story, generation after generation, an invisible web of generosity stretching across time, all leading back to this moment. To a dunny standing in her simple courtyard, holding a piece of carved wood that somehow contained the power to change everything. But the mysterious woman said, her voice taking on a warning tone, with great blessing comes great responsibility. If you accept this covenant, you will no longer belong entirely to yourself. You will become a conduit, a bridge between the spirit world and this world. The ancestors will speak through you. They will guide you. But they will also demand that you never forget where you came from. The carved wood began to show images now, swirling pictures in the golden light. Schools rising from empty lots, hospitals healing the sick, farms producing food for thousands, clean water flowing in places where children once walked miles for a single cup, but also other images, harder ones, the weight of impossible decisions, the burden of knowing that every choice affected countless lives, the loneliness of carrying such responsibility. You would never be hungry again, the woman continued, but you would carry the hunger of multitudes. You would have power beyond imagining, but you would be bound by duty beyond measure. Adunni looked around at the faces surrounding her, the street children who had become her family, Emeka, whose life had been changed by her grandmother's kindness, the successful people who owed their prosperity to seeds of generosity planted years before, and behind them all, the spirits of generous women who had walked this path before her. What happens, she asked, her voice barely audible, if I say no? If I choose to continue as I am? The mysterious woman smiled sadly. Then the covenant passes to another generation. Your future daughter. Or granddaughter. The gift always finds its way to the right hands. But, she paused, letting the weight of unspoken consequences hang in the air. The time is running short. The world grows colder. Hungrier. More divided. The ancestors grow restless. They see what is coming. In the distance, new sounds began to emerge. Not drums this time, but something more ominous. The rumble of vehicles. Many vehicles. Getting closer. Emeka's face darkened with concern. We may not have as much time as we hoped, he muttered. One of his associates whispered urgently in his ear, then hurried away, phone pressed to his ear. What is it? Adunni asked, though part of her already knew. The same part that had been warning her for weeks that her kindness was attracting unwanted attention. The government, Emeka said grimly. Someone has reported that you're running an illegal feeding program. They're coming to shut you down. To arrest you for operating without permits. For disturbing the peace. The carved wood in Adunni's hand blazed brighter, as if responding to the approaching threat. The spirits of the generous dead grew more visible, their faces urgent now. Warning. Protecting. Preparing for battle. This is why, the mysterious woman said, the covenant cannot wait. This is why you must choose now. Before those who fear generosity can stop what has already begun. The rumble of vehicles grew louder, closer. The street children instinctively moved closer to Adunni, forming a protective circle around the woman who had become their lifeline. But even their young faces showed they understood. This was bigger than just one woman feeding hungry children. This was about the eternal war between those who hoard and those who share. Between those who build walls and those who open doors. Between the forces that divide and the forces that unite. And in the next few minutes, everything would change. The carved would pulse one final time, then went completely still. Waiting, like everything else in the universe, for Adunni's answer. But just as she opened her mouth to speak, to make the choice that would alter the course of countless lives, the first government vehicle rounded the corner, followed by another, and another. Men in uniform poured out, officials with clipboards and hard faces, police with hands resting on weapons. All of them focused on one thing, stopping the woman who dared to feed the hungry without permission. The mysterious woman stepped backward, beginning to fade like morning mist. "Choose quickly," she whispered, "before the choice is taken from you." And as the officials marched toward them, as the street children pressed closer, as Emeka and his people formed a human shield around her, Adunni realized that some decisions cannot be made in comfort. Some choices only reveal themselves in the crucible of crisis. The carved wood in her hand waited. The ancestors watched. The future balanced on the edge of a blade. And everything that happened next would determine not just her fate, but the fate of every hungry soul who would come after, preparing for what was to come. The lead official stepped forward, his uniform crisp with authority, his clipboard raised like a weapon. "This gathering is illegal," he announced, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You are operating an unauthorized food distribution center. Everyone must disperse immediately." But as he spoke, something extraordinary happened. The carved wood in Adunni's hand suddenly burst into brilliant golden light, so bright that everyone had to shield their eyes, so powerful that the very air seemed to hum with ancient energy. And in that light, Adunni felt it, the presence of every generous soul who had ever walked this earth. Her grandmother's hand on her shoulder, her great-grandmother's whisper in her ear. Countless women who had chosen love over fear, who had chosen giving over keeping, who had chosen faith over doubt. "I accept," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But somehow everyone heard her. The officials stopped in their tracks. The children smiled through their tears. Emeka closed his eyes in relief. And the mysterious woman reappeared, solid now, radiant, no longer trying to hide what she truly was. The moment Adunni spoke those words, everything changed. The small courtyard behind the mechanic's shop began to transform. Not physically at first, but energetically. The air itself seemed to shimmer with possibility. The carved wood in her hand dissolved into pure light and flowed into her heart. And suddenly Adunni could see, not just with her eyes, but with the sight of the ancestors. She could see the invisible threads connecting every person in the courtyard, the golden lines of generosity that bound them all together. She could see the official with the clipboard, and behind him, the shadow of a hungry child he had once been. She could see the fear in his eyes, the way poverty had taught him to hoard power instead of sharing it. And she felt compassion. "Sir," she said, stepping toward him, her voice now carrying the authority of generations. "What is your name?" He blinked, confused by her gentle tone. I am Inspector Adebayo." "Tell me, Inspector Adebayo," Adunni continued, "when was the last time you were truly hungry?" The question hung in the air like a prayer. For a moment, his official mask slipped. Behind it was a man who remembered empty nights and growling stomachs. A man who had climbed out of poverty by building walls instead of bridges. That is not relevant," he stammered. But his hand had lowered the clipboard. His voice had lost its edge. "It is the most relevant thing in the world," Adunni replied. And then she did something that would be talked about in Lagos for generations to come. She walked to her pot, still warm from the morning's cooking, still holding just enough rice for one small bowl. She filled it and walked back to the inspector. "This is for you," she said simply. "Not because you deserve it, not because you've earned it, but because you're hungry. And hunger recognizes no uniform." Inspector Adebayo stared at the bowl in her hands, steam rising like incense, the aroma carrying memories of his grandmother's kitchen, of love served on chip plates, of the person he used to be before fear made him forget. His hands shook as he reached for it. The other officials watched in stunned silence as their leader accepted food. From the woman they had come to arrest. As he took his first bite, tears began to flow down his cheeks. And in that moment, the last barrier fell. "I remember now," he whispered. "I remember being hungry. I remember someone feeding me when I had nothing." He looked up at Adunni with new eyes. "How can I shut down something that I wish had existed when I needed it most?" The transformation was complete. What had begun as an arrest became a celebration. The officials put away their clipboards and badges. The street children brought out their few possessions to share. Emeka's associates began making phone calls, not to lawyers, but to architects and builders. And in the center of it all stood Adunni, no longer the struggling woman who sold phone cards at the bus stop. She was something new now, something ancient and powerful, a keeper of the covenant, a bridge between worlds, a living reminder that love multiplies when shared. Within months, what started as one woman feeding hungry children had become something unprecedented. The Adunni Foundation built schools that never turned away a hungry child, hospitals that treated rich and poor with equal care, farms that grew food to fill empty bellies across West Africa. But more than that, it became a symbol, a living proof that generosity creates abundance, that kindness is the most powerful force in the universe, that ancestors watch over those who serve with pure hearts. Years later, when journalists asked Adunni about that moment when everything changed, she would smile and say something that became famous across the continent. "I didn't gain anything that day. I simply remembered what I had always carried, the power to choose love over fear, to choose giving over keeping, to choose faith over doubt. The ancestors didn't give me wealth. They reminded me that I had always been rich, rich in the things that matter most. Love, compassion, the unbreakable bonds that connect us all." And late at night, when she walked through the schools and hospitals and homes that had grown from her grandmother's simple act of kindness, she could still hear them, the footsteps of the generous dead, no longer haunting, now celebrating, reminding her that every act of love creates ripples that reach across generations, that every bowl shared in kindness feeds not just the body, but the soul of the world, and that sometimes the greatest treasures are found not by taking, but by giving everything away. This is the truth the ancestors have always known. This is the secret they whisper to those who listen with their hearts. This is the miracle that happens when someone chooses to feed the street, not knowing what they might gain, but trusting that love always finds a way to multiply itself, always finds a way to come home.